towers of God crumble. Yet upon timeless foundations we build again, higher, wiser, whole.
I mentioned to you that I was a church prostitute, a very proud one. Moved. I don't know anybody besides myself that went through more churches full-heartedly, wholeheartedly, embracing from step to step the different ideas and different movements until a certain point. So, I'll tell you a story. There was this young man that loved light so much. He really loved light so intensely. Like, if you ever love something like you couldn't live without it, that's how much this young man loved light. And so he got himself into a house that was full of lamps. There's so many lamps in the house, and it was lighted by that, by the lamps. And because of his love for light, he dedicated all his life within that house to trim those lamps and care for those lamps and keep them burning. And people of the house are like, proud, we have a fully lighted house. There's no darkness in this house. We are the house of light. And this young man, deeply in love with light, spends all of his time in that house. And one day he's caring for the lamps, and he realized that dark corner where the light was flicking a little bit, and then there was dark shadows at the corner. And he got really bothered about those dark shadows and the flickering light. And he called the masters of the house and called their attention to it. It's like, don't bother about it. Don't even dare ask questions about that. It's not that important. You should focus on all of this other light. These are not questions that you should ask. But because of his love for light and his hatred for darkness, he couldn't let go of that particular darkness and those shadows he saw at those corners. And he kept nagging at him. But the people in that house, the masters of those house, did not entertain questions about those shadows. It was not supposed to be discussed. It was not even supposed to be asked. And he was sitting one day, and somebody passing through the village where the house was mentioned that there are also other houses with lamps and lights. And he's not confined. He's not condemned and to stay in that particular house for his life. He could move to another house. And so he moved to another house next down with brighter lights, tinted windows, chandeliers, massive chandeliers with bright pulsating lights. And this house was a very proud house. We are not like that house over there that has some shadows which they don't even want to touch or talk about or discuss. We discuss those shadows and we've lighted them up. Look, our chandeliers brightens every part of the house. And for a moment, he felt like he'd found his home. He'd found a place where all the problems and all the darkness of the old house are no longer a problem here. And so what happens? Eventually, with time, he also discovered that behind all the tinted glasses and behind all the chandeliers and the bright lights was also very dark shadows that nobody wanted to talk about. He called the masters of this house and pointed their attention to those dark shadows. And the masters, some smiled and some frowned and some dismissed. And again, it was those topics that should not be discussed, questions that should not be asked, things you're not supposed to bother about. You should focus on all the bright lights of the chandeliers. And this young man, lover of light, hater of darkness, deeply in love with light, can't live without light. And he kept being bored at, wants to understand why there's all these dark shadows behind the tinted glasses and all of that. And eventually he moved from house to house with different lights, correcting all the mistakes. He would go to the next house. There are no dark shadows behind the tinted glasses, but eventually there are other shadows in other places that are just lurking creepily and looking at places. Eventually this young man got tired of moving from house to house and got tired all of that. And he just sat outside one time and not in any particular house and just sat there and just tired of it all. And it was when he was sitting outside, not in any particular house, that he saw something really amazing. The light of the moon, just bright everywhere, just filled every space in every corner, wasn't particularly held hostage by anyone. No one particularly claiming they own that light. It was just light there for everyone, for all. No matter where you are, the light reached to you and touched you. It was not a light of any house. It was not a light that anyone was particularly proud of and claiming a trademark of. And that was when he realized that it is true that from his very first house to the last house he left, all those houses did have light. And all of these houses had somehow tried to contain and made ownership and claim to some part of the light of the moon. But until he was out, that he now saw the light of the moon, and then he could embrace the light that was deep enough and grand enough to embrace his ambition and soul and his love for light. So having moved from all the different houses and tried to solve all the inconsistencies, he's under a broad open space now. The Hebrew concept for deliverance, to come to a large open space. It's a biblical concept for deliverance also, or salvation, a large open space. It's in the large open space now with the light of the moon. And realized that lights were never, the light that he so much loved was never meant to be trapped in lamps. And even though every church, every movement, every home held a part of it, and that was okay, but not necessarily all of it. And so that was me, moving from church to church to church to church. It wasn't always rebellion. It wasn't a matter of rebellion. It was always something fueled by that deep hunger for a larger light, a light that was all encompassing, a light that touched every part of my soul, every part of my intellect, and every part of my being, that I didn't have to deny parts of my souls and deny part of myself and part of my being, that the lights did not shine in that area. And you know, to some people that, and I've been there were some of those movements I was in, that the light there was only relevant if you were fully dedicated to serving in church. Outside that, it wasn't very relevant. It wasn't relevant in your business. It wasn't relevant in your job. So you had to compartmentalize. You had this part where it was your spiritual life, where everything you learned in that movement or in church was applicable in that area. But you had the other part of your life that nothing you learned there was applicable in that area, or at least was not applicable in a way that was meaningful and impactful. Then you go to another movement where it says, well, this church is not only to be tied in church. You could be church in the world and in your job and in everything else. But in another sense, also it meant that, okay, if you're going to take church to your job site, it means you go to your job site and try to proselytize everybody in your church to join the particular genre of your faith. But again, there was no cutting and carry across principles for life that you learned in church that apply to relationships and all those things in a healthy way. And so me moving from church to church and from place to place was not rebellion. It was me hungry for this deeper light that was complete, one light that could shine in all places. Not that I would need a light that shines in my spiritual life, and then I need another light for my financial life, and probably another light for my relationship life, or another light for my job, and all of that stuff. Just one light, one true light that shines in every area, that lights up every area of my soul, that applies to every aspect. And so I move from movements to movements and find different variations of this. And so every church, it was like from my first church, I was handed the Apostles' Creed. Then if you read the first chapter of my book, God Was Watching and So Was I. That's the title of the first chapter of my book. And I really discussed that in my experience in my first church. And that was where I was handed the Apostles' Creed. And every other church I went to after that had its own version of the Apostles' Creed, that fundamental paradigm that they give you to hold to as the belief that that movement or that church organization held to. And you couldn't, those were not questionable. That was the bungalow skyscraper foundation that you had to build on and so on. So you were limited to that. So I kept moving from church to church and until trying to solve all those inconsistencies and trying to find this big light until I found myself outside. And there's some of you where you've gone through the same journey, and I'm not here to say that church is not important. Church is extremely important. I would love many people to go to church if they can find God and find life there and find meaning and purpose. But there are some people that are just strange, like myself. And if you've gone through that journey and you find yourself sitting outside, and I found myself sitting outside, I'd experienced deep, real relationships with the divine creator that I couldn't be so out that I would say there's no God. I would jump into the other pond and say I'm an atheist or an agnostic. I knew so much reality, or at least I wanted to keep this reality in my life. But when I found myself outside, I knew I couldn't go back to church, or at least church the way it was. I knew that going back would mean I would have to commit to do homicide to my brain and volunteer my brain for brain damage and my sense of intellectual integrity. And I just couldn't go back to church. So standing outside there in the middle, again, there are people in church who will tell you that outside of church, you don't have God and you're lost and you don't have spirituality. And there are people also, there are all voices in different aspects. But again, I'm just telling my story. I was outside. I know that I couldn't go back, but I wanted to continue to have meaningful connection with the Creator, a meaningful system that is tied with the Creator and a meaningful system for life. And I eventually found that moonlight I just talked about in this story. And if you're here and you can't go back and you can't necessarily go forward into the other pond, then we are friends. And really, my voice is for you. My book is for you. This journey is for you. Is to tell you that you could find a beautiful God, a wonderful God, an amazing God that created you even outside of those houses. And that is not a condemnation to people in those houses. Recently, I was talking with someone who proposed to be an atheist, and I said, I don't have a problem. I told you I'm a big believer in people choosing what to believe. Actually, there's a whole chapter in my book that says to build a paradigm, the very first choice you got to make is the choice of whether there's going to be a God. You're going to believe that God exists or God does not exist. And this is a matter of choice. And we're going to talk about this subsequently. Because I do know that some of you would want to argue that anybody who says that God does not exist is the fool, because there's all this evidence to show that God exists. Well, we're going to talk about that. Again, you want to build your paradigm, you got to start with the very first choice. I'm very okay with people choosing to believe and to live a life as though God does not exist. That's fine. I'm also okay with people who choose to believe that God exists. So I was talking with someone not so long ago who proposed to be an atheist and did not believe that God exists. And I could sense his arrogance and his high-mindedness. I was like, I am okay with being friends with atheists. I'm okay with respecting people's choices of what to believe. But I find it funny that you, as an atheist, think that everyone who believes in God is stupid and brainwashed, and his brain is not wrapped out well. His brain cells are not well mapped out. And I called out that arrogance, that idea that he seemed to think that being an atheist made him superior intelligence to be able to realize the foolishness that people who believe that is God get to believe that. Anyways, so my point is to say this is that if you're outside now and you know that you can go back, you can find a home inside that really fuels your soul. You can find that light that lights up every part of your soul and your idiosyncrasies and passions and desires. Then let's have these discussions. You really want to read my book. You really want to listen to more of me, and I tell you my story. And I'm not here to tell you what to believe. I'm not here to tell you what you must believe, what is wrong or what is right, or they are wrong, this is right, or church is bad. No. I'm here to say these are the options. Choose what works for you. You want a skyscraper, a bungalow? That's fine. You got to choose. And let's talk more about this in the upcoming episodes.
In every age, the towers of thought crumble. Yet upon timeless foundations, we build again. Higher, wiser, whole,